And welcome to Thrift Shop Biography. This is the one about Boy George. Thank you for listening. Hello.
Hi.
This week, we have been reading the autobiography of Boy George.
Take it like a man. It's the first one.
Yeah.
And we're bursting at the seams to talk about it.
Oh my God. The whole time I've been reading it, we kind of have Boy George in common and always have done. So I knew you would have been loving this book.
Of course.
But I've been dying to talk about it. So we should just get straight into it. Oh no, hang on, we can't get straight into it.
Yeah.
I need to ask you.
We've got to explain. We both love Boy George.
I know how you feel about it, but can you just tell us how you feel about it?
I remember the first time I saw Boy George on Top of the Pops, the first time he was on it, Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? And my dad said, "That's a man." I said, "No, it's not." He said, "Yes, it is. I'll bet you 5p. 5p was my whole weekly pocket money at the time. And I took the bet and I shook on it. Bloody hell. He said it is because I've seen it in the paper and I didn't believe him. And the next day he took my 5p weekly pocket money. I've pretty much never gambled again. And I love Boy George from that day on. That's the beginning of my long history. And I'd say he changed my life. I'd say he changed how I thought and how I dressed. And like Bowie changed him, he changed me.
Wow.
Yeah. Over to you.
My big sister was the biggest fan of Boy George from the beginning. So I just heard that first album, Kissing to Be Clever, then Colour by Numbers, like all day long. Just by osmosis, I became a massive fan myself, and Culture Club was the first ever concert I went to.
Amazing!
Yeah.
Oh, if I could have gone to a concert in the day, did it blow your mind?
Yeah, of course. I was like 9, I think.
Oh my God.
King was support.
Oh, I love King. Okay, so we really love Boy George.
We're full-on Boy George and Culture Club fans. Yeah,
massively.
100%. And I include Culture Club collectively in my fandom of Boy George because I think they're a fantastic band.
Yeah, me
as well.
too. And I used to dress up like him when I was a kid.
You still do.
Oh, shut up. Oh, no, a little bit. Anyway.
Right, let's do it.
Right, well, his mum...
Dinah
is Irish. They couldn't be more Irish, those roots. His mum was pregnant at 18 years, unwed, Catholic, a total crime. So she left the baby with her parents and moved to London.
She got a job in a pub.
Woolwich.
In Woolwich. And in walked this very handsome, charming Irish guy called Jerry. And they pretty much hit her off straight away. Because she's over in London. She doesn't really know anyone. She's living in the pub, right? She basically got banished from Ireland because she dared to have a baby out of wedlock.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And she tells him about the baby and he doesn't care. Even though his family are all Catholic. And it's outrageous to them that she's had a baby. And they have to get married anyway once he gets her pregnant.
Yeah.
So he's already got a little rebel streak in him.
Yeah, mum and dad, they're not.
They're not complete conformists.
They're not. He gets her pregnant, which turns out to be Kevin, which is Boy George's older brother, obviously.
Yeah.
And then Richard, the little baby that was left in Ireland, is brought over.
Yeah, once they've sort of settled down.
Yeah. And then they have Boy George in 1961.
Yeah.
So Boy George has got 2 big brothers, but he ends up having altogether... Well, the family is 5 boys and 1 girl.
Yeah, there's Gerald and David that come after Boy George, and Siobhan, a sister, littlest sister.
So it's a big Irish family.
There's loads of them.
Oh, and of course, and they don't have money. They're growing up in small houses on estates, and Boy George just talk about the whole time he's a kid. He's sharing a bedroom with 3 of his brothers. Yeah. So there's 4 boys in 1 bedroom.
And it's that classic thing where they hate it. They always hate it, want to be free. But when they get older, they don't like being alone because they're so used to company.
It's like Dolly Parton.
Yeah, it's very like that.
Yeah.
They always need someone to sleep near them or in bed with them or.
It's interesting because we've read a lot of these books now. And we always try and figure out what it is that spurs people on to become massively famous, like the outsider factor, which definitely is in this book. But also, I'm beginning to realise people who have lots of brothers and sisters, Boy George, Madonna, Dolly Parton, it also seems to be a factor for people who become massively world famous.
Kind of fighting to be seen and heard in the clan.
Yeah, it forms the personality, I think.
Yeah.
Reading about Boy George's childhood is just like, oh my God, it's just so full on. It's so noisy. It's chaos.
It's violent. It's outspoken. He never shied away from dressing up. He never shied away from who he was. He was always out and proud.
I love that. Even like as a little 11-year-old boy, he said his mum had makeup, but she never wore it unless somebody got married. So Boy George would sneak in and put his mum's makeup on at the age of 11. and dye his hair and wear outrageous clothes. And you would think, because his dad is a boxer, and his dad wanted his sons to be boxers, and he would take them to the boxing gym. So that's the environment that little effeminate Boy George is growing up in. You would think that anybody would hide that in fear of being beaten up by your brothers. He was
Which
beaten
he was.
up. Yeah.
It's amazing. He comes out and says everything, dresses how he wants, and just takes the beatings and fights back. Violence is just a constant throughout his whole life, whether it's from people on the street, his friends, his partners, his family. It's just constant punch-ups.
But he can fight back.
He fights back.
Yeah.
Later on, he's often saying, me and John were fighting and I ended up with a bruised lip and a something. He never says how John came out, apart from that John seems to always break his fingers from punching walls when he misses.
Right. Yeah.
You don't really know how even that is.
It's interesting. Boy George is very much his dad's son.
Yeah.
Even though he's like a gay, effeminate version of that bruiser man.
I don't know how effeminate he is, though, do you? Because he dresses up like a woman, but he doesn't...
He's camp.
He's camp, but that's verbal.
Yeah.
And, he's a bruiser underneath it all.
He is, but he gravitates towards women, doesn't he? Like all of his friends when he's growing up tend to be girls. I mean, he is effeminate, isn't he?
He's in tune with all of his feelings.
Yes.
Certainly stands up for himself, verbally and physically. It's such a flipping one-off.
So he's also growing up in the age of Mark Bolan and David Bowie.
Yeah,
right?
So I guess that sets the precedent. They were so legendary that it's not so weird to dress up in that era. Mm-hmm. They actually broke down those barriers first. The way he describes dressing up, it's fashion is a huge part of his whole reason for living then becomes going out and finding the freaks, the fellow freaks. But how he talks about dressing up, him and his mates go to charity shops and they just search for old vintage clothes and then they'll do things like take the collar off something and sew it onto something else, or he gets his mum to sew it up. But they're really creative stuff. And then he saw someone at a club in a bin bag, so he goes one step further and gets a Tesco bag and makes a dress out of it. Why this book is so big and long, because he really describes everything that you actually need to know, and it becomes a bit of a Bible if you were researching this era on the fashion of the era and all that, because he says the high street chains were no longer dictating what the fashion is. The kids were. The kids out in the clubs. And they're then taking their fashion from them. It's really cool, isn't it? It all goes alongside Vivienne Westwood, Malcolm McLaren, that sex shop, their clothes that he couldn't afford, that seemed to us to be so punk and liberated and everything. When you read his side of it, it's like they're unaffordable. So it's all anarchy, but they're like 60 quid in the early 70s.
Yeah, so it's not punk, actually,
it's not punk.
If you're charging 60 quid for a T-shirt.
But what we know is that money wasn't getting to Vivienne Westwood because the bloke managing the shop was bunking it all on drugs.
Yes. I love at one point, Boy George really wants a jumper from the sex shop.
Yeah.
And he's got half the money and he begs his dad for the other half of the money. And his dad finally caves in and says, okay, but they'll have to take a check. And Boy George is so excited, he phones up and he says, do you take a check? And they said, yeah, but you have to make it out to sex. And so his dad absolutely refuses to write it because I can't have sex on the stubs in my checkbook. So Boy George then phones up again and he says, oh, my dad won't do it. So they give him the company name and he can write the check out to that. That's so funny.
I know. But you know what? In my mind, I always thought his dad was a bit of a villain because he beat him up and stuff. And I'm reading this now going, he's not a villain at all.
Oh, I think he is. I think it's a relationship of two halves. I think because of his dad's own upbringing, I think he is a bruiser. I think he uses his fists a lot of the time. But running alongside that, there's such a tenderness for his little effeminate son.
And he actually can express himself. Exactly. Yeah. He bought him a jumper from that shop.
Yeah.
He did actually support him. And when it comes out, there's this whole thing where he's met this older man and he's only 15. Yeah. Because it's all involved with the police, he kind of has to admit that he's meeting a man, and his mum, dad have to then know he's gay. So they're really there for him and they don't judge him when he comes out. His brothers all knew anyway. Yeah,
their dad takes his brothers for a drive and says, we need to tell you about George. George is a bit funny. And the brothers are like, what do you mean funny? Ha ha, or funny peculiar? And then one of the brothers goes, Dad, if you're trying to tell us George is queer, we know.
Yeah. How could you had to know.
What's interesting also about George as a young boy in the house is that he answers his dad back
Yeah.
when the others don't.
Yeah.
So even when George is like 11, if the dad has a go at him, George will answer him back, and the dad will hit George. And actually, what I think when George is about 14, they have a big fight, and the dad slaps George, and he falls down the stairs and hits his head on the radiator, and it causes him to bleed, and he stays at a friend's house for like 4 days. Then the dad actually says, I'm really sorry, I'm really sorry. Whereas the other boy, when they all go to the boxing club, his brother Gerald is like a really good boxer, and everyone's like, oh, wow. Later on, Gerald says to George, I hate boxing. I'm doing it because I want to please Dad. The other brothers kind of...
They've gone the other way.
Yeah, they please their dad, whereas George is the one who's rebelling against his dad, even though he gets a good hiding for it.
He's a really strong character, isn't he?
Yeah.
But at that point, he says, all right, Dad, I'm not coming home unless you promise to never hit me again. And he never hit him again.
Yeah. I mean, when do you stop hitting your teenage son who's beginning to be as tall as you and as broad as you? Because you're going to get hit back.
Yes.
And you do have 4 teenage sons at this point. They might gang up on you.
That's true.
But I do get that despite their differences, despite the arguments and how many times they fall out, there is a real love and a real bond between Boy George and his dad, which actually continues throughout their whole lives, even when he's massively famous.
There really is.
Yeah. Even when we'll get to all the troubles Boy George has later in his life, his dad is always there.
He's
his
so
mum,
there for him.
Even I love the fact that when he's a massive pop star, his mum and dad will get in their car and come into the house and say, right, sit down. They still parent him.
Oh, they're very much so, but he bloody needs it.
Yeah, he does need it.
Yeah. Some of the characters he meets, right, and he does name them all, but some of the cool ones are people like Jeremy Healy, who he meets when he's a fellow kid. He's like another 15-year-old. They're at a train station or something, but because they're both outrageously dressed, they sort of seek each other out, and both from the same area, so they're always on the trains home together and stuff. Jeremy Healy becomes a legendary DJ.
And Hazy Fantasy.
And he starts Hazy Fantasy. It's amazing, actually, of that scene, because they're all dressing up and they're all of the same vibe. They love fashion and they love music. A lot of them go into bands and form our 80s listening, don't they?
The thing that surprised me is that one of the names in this book is Andrea Arnold, who I must have forgotten she was part of the gang. She's like a big film director now.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
she used
wow.
to present Number 73 in the 80s.
Really?
Yeah. And then she just carved out this career as a really esteemed film director.
Wow.
And I must have known that because I've been obsessed with this era my whole life.
Yeah.
But somehow I'd forgotten that she was part of it.
Amazing.
And it's interesting, even before we get to the Blitz Club, where we know lots of these people were hanging out, even in his suburban life, lots of these people went on to become known people.
Because I think it's because he basically wore a massive siren flag flashing saying I'm different, that he just attracted the same like. And in that era of dressing up, the brave and creative people were always dressed up, so you could spot them, so you'd meet them. Plus the scene was kind of small, once you're going into the clubs. And it's amazing because I remember thinking this Blitz Club and these punks and these new romantics and reading about it and smash hits when I was a kid. Oh, what an amazing thing London is. And you come to London, you're like, where is everyone? There's only about 200 of them in this club. It wasn't as big as you think. It was actually really niche, but it just had a massive impact.
So he's hanging out. He's got his little gang of fellow freaks, and they would get on the train. I mean, they're not that far away. We are in London. We're in suburban London.
Yeah.
So they get on the train at weekends and they go into clubs and stuff. A club called Global Village, which actually now is heaven.
Yeah.
And he said that the queue was as exciting as the club.
Because you meet everybody and talk while you can still hear them.
He's very social.
Yeah.
And he loves everybody who's a freak. He'll go up and talk to all of them and make himself known. He's still a kid. He's still, 16 at this point?
He really is. Oh, around this time as well, he was stalking David Bowie, and he actually joined a gang to stake out his house. Oh, yeah. And he said it wasn't really about trying to see David Bowie. It's actually more about finding out there's people like you. That's really key. I mean, later on, tons of people stake out his house and he's really pissed off. But, it is about meeting each other. It's the cue again, isn't it?
Yes.
That you're not alone.
He said that one day Angie Bowie opened the door and told them all to fuck off.
Yeah, they were really pleased. Yeah.
I thought there was a really interesting point here that him and his freako friends who were wearing the outrageous clothes and boys in makeup and 2-foot high hair, getting the train and going into London. They'd always move as a gang because safety in numbers. But he said there was a marked difference once punk hit the mainstream, the national news, because the tabloid press demonized punks and they made them the enemy of the country. So then when they were on the trains going into London, they would start getting abuse. Whereas before that, they never had. He said sometimes people would smile benignly at them and assume they were going to a fancy dress party or something. But once punk hit, all of a sudden they were being spat at and shouted at and stuff.
Yeah. This is about 1976, 77, that sort of era. I mean, disco was happening, but he really wasn't into it. He was into punk.
But of course, once punk became a national scene as well, then all the lads want a part of it.
Yeah.
So actually it changes the atmosphere within the punk gigs and stuff. The punks who would go with their torn T-shirts and spiky hair would laugh and bully the boys in makeup and the frills and stuff. And George hated that because he loved the energy and the atmosphere of a punk club. But then he said the lads started moving in and it became this aggressive thing and he would not feel safe there anymore.
Which evolved into the Blitz scene and Philip's Salon and all that stuff. And he met Marilyn, that's really important.
Oh my God, Marilyn. There's so much of Marilyn in this book.
There's tons of it, yeah. Marilyn is this bloke, I can't remember his real name.
Peter Robinson.
Peter Robinson. And he dressed up like Marilyn. He started off looking like a pig, he calls him. And then evolved like a butterfly. Yeah, he's absolutely stunning. And he looked amazing when he was Marilyn.
Yeah.
But he's Monroe. But he's been through a lot of incarnations with his look. Yeah, but they're really, really pals. He's just got no inhibitions at all.
Marilyn.
Yeah, and he's got no devious streak. He's just out there being evil and hilarious and everything in between. And he's like probably everything Boy George wants to be.
They have such a love-hate relationship. I mean, they met as teenagers. They really clicked in terms of humour and outrageousness and their desire to shock people. But at the same time, there was a real competition between them and they would be jealous of each other. As much as they would be together and have the best time ever, they also fell out spectacularly. And do you know what? That absolutely happens to this day because I follow them both on social media. Marilyn, I mean, he's a nightmare. You can see how the relationship works. So where is he right now? 1976.
Oh, he has a really good Birmingham couple of years.
Yeah, that's with Martin DeVille, right? Who later is C.C. Sputnik.
Yeah, but at the time he's just a real fashion. He's mocking up loads of amazing outfits. A bit like Vivienne Westwood, sewing all day. Yeah. He's got a fashion stall in the basement of Oasis, which is where I went when I was 17 to get my nose pierced. Oasis was the coolest place for clothes and stuff. Nobody went from London to Birmingham to check out the scene. It just wasn't cool enough.
That's like doing it in reverse.
In reverse. Yeah. And at that point, Duran Duran were forming, so they were going to check them out. I think they were just jealous. There's so much jealous bitchiness. It's exciting, the Birmingham scene.
Yeah, and he also said that the scene in Birmingham was much friendlier than the scene in London.
Yes.
I mean, he went there to visit. He met Martin DeVille and then he went to hang out for a weekend with a couple of friends from London and it all went terrible. And in the end, Boy George decided to stay. Yeah. But then Martin DeVille, because his stall in Birmingham under Oasis was going so well, he actually then got a spot down in London.
Kensington Market, and then took off there.
Yeah, so then they started travelling down to London again, and that's what got Boy George back into London.
And they started squatting. This squatting scene is amazing, because now, knowing a bit about London, those Wardour Street, Great Titchfield Street, it's bang in the middle of Soho. Yeah. And you realise that Soho, a bit like how New York changed, Soho was a different place. Now it's just so... You couldn't even get in there now. It's all taken. You can't imagine the buildings were empty and people were squatting there. And there's all this creativity, a lot of fashion students, a lot of music people, but a lot of just people who were dossing about but creating art. And all they did is break down the door, get in, and then buy padlocks and put them on there. Yeah. That was it. And then they all went around these empty houses picking rooms. And a lot of them didn't have electricity, so they just had candles. A lot of them didn't even have water. So he said he did go to someone's party and take a quick bath. That was just a normal thing to do. And then he'd say, oh, so-and-so got a squat that had hot water and we were all really jealous. Why didn't we find that house? It's such an adventure.
Yeah. It's such an amazing little community of artists.
Yeah, bang in the middle of London.
Oh, it's such a shame what's happened to central London. Only Russian oligarchs could afford to live in those buildings now.
Yeah, that's right.
Whereas once upon a time, they were really being used, and art was being created.
Yeah.
And
It's like we say, that it's hard to imagine these things happening organically now. But I guess it's all gone online. This is what we always wonder about. The world's one big artistic community now, isn't it? Connected through the internet, I guess.
Yeah, but it's not the
It's not the same. It's not the same. But there were drugs around, right? But he wasn't taking them. He was drinking tea and just having a great time dressing up. But there were drugs around because one of their friends, Mitzi, died of a heroin overdose, which really shocked them all.
Yeah, one of the squats, he was aware that the basement, a drug dealer was in there and there was kind of a drug scene going on. And then we arrive at a rather infamous hangout called the Blitz Club.
Yes.
Like you say, it's amazing how iconic this club and scene is, considering that the club itself is small and is only about 200 people.
Yeah.
It's kind of highly regarded around the world.
Yeah, if you read the history of this whole scene, it starts there and it's just this one tiny little club.
Started by Steve Strange.
Steve Strange and Rusty Egan.
Rusty Egan, yeah.
Steve Strange became We Fade to Grey.
Visage.
Yeah. Fade to Grey is unbelievably good.
Yeah.
And he had the amazing hair that goes down into a V shape. Boy George copied at some point. He did take bits from all these people.
I think everybody copied, like he gets into all the whole white person with dreadlocks
thing.
And him and Jeremy Healy fell out over who came up with it first, and they didn't talk for 5 years.
Yeah. And he said it was their look. They did the dreads thing first, but it's who gets seen in it first, and he got seen in it first.
I think all artists steal.
Healthy competition.
Yeah, it's influence. Yeah. Okay, so the Blitz place. The Blitz Club is just this amazing place where all of the cool kids, new romantics, all the men in makeup and the outrageous girls, it's where they hung out. Was it every Tuesday?
It sort of formed the 80s as we know it, isn't it? The early 80s.
The Blitz Club. Am I right in thinking it wasn't the Blitz Club every night of the week?
It was a night.
It was a night at a club, which makes it even more obscure.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
And it didn't even last that long.
No. And it was all about dressing up.
Yeah.
Because they weren't taking drugs at this point. Mm-hmm. So it was absolutely all about the peacocking of it all. And he ended up getting a job at the cloakroom there.
Yes.
And he just robbed everyone. He went through everyone's pockets. So it's this whole thing of squatting, robbing. You know, they robbed the charity shop. He said they robbed Oxfam all the time. They went in Oxfam, went to the changing room, put the clothes on under their clothes, and they robbed each other. They went to parties, robbed each other, went to the squats, robbed each other. And he robbed everything out of everyone's pockets whilst he was at the cloakroom of the Blitz.
Yeah. Everybody was just pinching off of
They
each
really
other.
were. I don't know why we're laughing. Terrible behaviour.
George at this time, though, also did have jobs. Like he was a window dresser for the Street Theatre fashion shop. I think that manager of that shop, who was an older guy, really took a shine.
Yeah, and really saw his creativity and valued it.
Yeah, and he only paid him for one day. It's almost like there wasn't a job for him, but he just wanted him to be there.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. He did lots of odd jobs, but he really didn't want to work for a living.
Oh, no, absolutely not. Yeah.
None of them did.
No.
Yeah, right, so then Bow Wow Wow.
Malcolm McLaren?
Yep.
So Bow Wow Wow were already in the charts at this point, were they?
Yes. So that's the group that Malcolm McLaren formed.
After the Sex Pistols.
Bad husband.
Well, what's also in this book, which wasn't in Vivienne Westwood's book, is how Boy George turned up at Malcolm McLaren's house for a meeting just to see Vivienne Westwood cycle away after bricking his window.
That's true.
Because she found out he had a teenage German girlfriend.
Yep.
The whole thing is just
excellent.
Chaos, isn't it? I love it.
I know. Yeah, so he said, it's right around the time when Vivienne Westwood and Malcolm McLaren had launched their pirate collection. It just all ties in with that other book we read.
Yeah. And when I picture Bow Wow Wow, actually, I picture them in the pirate look.
Yeah.
Actually.
And he just blagged his way in to be their singer, even though they had a singer that they didn't want to get rid of.
Yes.
Annabelle.
Annabella Lewin,
Yeah.
who was plucked from obscurity from a laundrette in West Hampstead when she was 14 years old.
14.
And she is naked on the album cover of the Bow Wow Wow album.
Dodgy.
Wouldn't happen today.
No.
Yeah, and Boy George goes up to Malcolm McLaren and says, "Oh, I heard..." Because I think he hung out with a couple of the guys in Bow Wow Wow who were around on the scene, and Boy George would be singing to people. And I think one of them said to him, "You're a better singer than Annabella." And I also think that things had friction with Arabella within the group, and think, because she's a 14-year-old girl who has been plonked with these older lads and probably doesn't want to be naked, actually. So then Boy George, when they say that he's a better singer than Annabella, he goes to Malcolm McLaren and says, "Oh, I hear you need a new singer for Bow Wow Wow." And he's like, "No, I don't." But anyway, Bow Wow Wow do a live gig, and Malcolm McLaren gets Boy George in to sing one song or something. And they call him Lieutenant Lush. So that he's not Boy George for a while.
No.
In fact, he's not Boy George yet in this whole story, is he? He's just George.
That's right.
But now he's in Bow Wow Wow. Malcolm McLaren has named him Lieutenant Lush. What a crap name.
Well, the Captain Sensible comes along not so long after.
Yeah. Well, he's around.
They're all out there.
Yeah,
he is, He loves it, basically. He just wants to be in a band. He's singing all the time, and he's very musical, and he just wants to be in a band. He's desperate. And he loved it being in front of an audience. He got a taste for it. So he's like, right, this is it now. I want to form a band.
Yeah, because it didn't work out with Bow Wow Wow. I mean, Boy George, Lieutenant Lush, had a fantastic time.
Yeah.
But it didn't quite work for various reasons, because Bow Wow Wow already had a singer.
Yeah, that's right. That's one of the reasons. Probably the main one. Well, this is surprising to me that it's actually Mikey Craig, the bass player, who approached Boy George because he'd seen him, a picture of him, and thought he looked interesting, and actually approached him.
I love Mikey Craig.
Me too.
I saw him on Regent Street a couple of years ago.
Did you?
And I was a bit starstruck. He was just a face in the crowd going about his business. And as he walked past me, I thought, fucking hell, that was Mikey Craig.
Oh.
I've met Boy George as well. I parked Boy George's car.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Oh, how weird. I just remembered that. Yeah, he was ace.
Yeah.
He's so funny. So Mikey Craig, he's the first person in Culture Club with Boy George.
Yeah. And then they tracked down John Moss, who was already a known drummer.
Boy George is with Kirk Brandon walking down the King's Road, and Kirk Brandon says, "Oh, look, that's John Moss. He's a drummer in The Damned." That intrigues him to track John Moss down.
Yeah, they really do just track him down.
Yeah.
Didn't he also drum briefly with Adamant?
He auditioned for Adam and the Ants.
Auditioned.
Yeah, and he called Adamant anally retentive or something. But they liked the sound, because again, Adam and the Ants...
Such a drumming
it's Burundi
sound.
drumming, which Bow Wow Wow also had.
Yeah.
And actually Culture Club, that first album, does have
Oh,
elements
the
of
drum
that in it.
rhythms in that, the whole first album.
I think Mikey Craig actually has a lot to do with the sound of that first album, because it's very dub, it's very reggae.
Yeah, it really is. And that's obviously in the end why they called it Culture Club, because, well, they got Roy Hay, who's kind of the straightest one of the lot.
Yeah.
With,
Well, that's a culture.
Yeah, that's
Straight
just
white
English
Essex
man. Then you
culture.
got a Jamaican roots reggae style Mikey Craig, and Boy George some Irish roots, and then John Moss, Jewish drummer. He talks about him being Jewish and very small a lot. Calls him a dwarf all the time. That's his main weapon when they're fighting. Comes up a lot.
Also, the four of them, I also feel like they all bring different musical influences, and that's the culture.
Yeah.
Like Mikey is the reggae and the dub, John is true punk. Boy George is hanging out on the scene, but he's also got a history of Shirley Bassey. The first line in this book is, "I wanted to be Shirley Bassey when I grew up."
And he loves soul.
Yeah.
And punk. It's very eclectic.
And Roy Hay is like a white, blue-eyed soul boy, really.
Yeah, and he's got keyboards and guitar.
Yeah.
So they're a killer mix. They really are, obviously, else they wouldn't have made it.
But it wasn't Roy Hay initially. There was a guitarist called Suede.
That's
when
right.
they first got together, but that was short-lived because he just wasn't that good.
No.
Unfortunately. But that was hard for him.
Yeah, I know.
To actually be almost part of Culture Club.
True.
And then to get bumped for Roy Hay, and then to see them become the biggest band in the world. I wonder whatever happened to him. We'll never know.
We'll never know. Oh, and they met Helen Terry, the final cherry on the cake, who is the backing vocals extraordinaire. Very gospel sound.
She's amazing.
Got an amazing voice, yeah.
She was quite short-lived with them herself. She was only there for the first couple of albums, and then it went over to like 3
Backing singers, including Jocelyn Brown.
and Ruby Turner.
Yeah.
It's amazing. They had to have that 3 of them to make up for one Helen
Yeah.
Terry. But Helen Terry, she had a very short-lived solo career, and then she just seemed to fall off the face of the planet.
She did, didn't she?
Because she was, okay, going out on one here, one of the best voices of the 1980s.
Yeah. She's got an incredible voice.
Yeah.
We were jealous of her when we were kids.
Were you?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because
Yeah.
she was accepted as part of
Yeah,
Culture
because
Club.
we were going to grow up and marry Boy George. That was the plan.
Yeah, but Helen Terry
All of us
wasn't
were.
married to him.
She wasn't married. She's actually gay. It's absolute nonsense. And Boy George wasn't on the market for girls either. So it's utter nonsense.
In retrospect, it's very interesting that the biggest heartthrob for girls in the early 1980s effectively looked like a woman.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a lesbian thing. Like, young
No.
girls really, really screamed for Boy
Yeah,
George.
but in his real life, in this book, he's saying a lot of women fell in love with him, his friends, and thought they could turn him. Because he's still a man. He's so much of a man and very charismatic.
So they get the band, they track down John Moss, and John Moss has experience in the music industry, so he's more instrumental in getting the band together.
Instrumental.
Oh, look at that. And he gets some rehearsal time and makes phone calls.
He's like the grown-up, really, isn't he? And
Yes,
he's got a
he
bit of
is.
money. He's comes from a millionaire background.
And he's a couple of years older, right?
Yeah, and he's actually funding them for a while because none of them have proper jobs. Roy Hay was training to be a hairdresser. Oh, he comes out really well in this book.
Yeah, he
He's
does.
a real friend to him.
He's the most grounded, I would say.
He really is, yeah.
And he probably the one who worked the hardest at Culture Club, I would
Yeah.
think. Mikey seems like a bit of a dope-smoking layabout.
Yeah, and
to
doesn't
be
always
honest.
turn up, a little bit flaky. But yeah, Roy marries his first girlfriend. He says, when we have a #1 album, I'll marry my girlfriend. And they have it so fast. He's like, oh, that was too fast. But they're still married to this day. I think their kids are
Alison,
grown up
yeah.
now. Yeah.
And I like the relationship she has with George, actually, because he said initially, I don't want any girls coming on tour.
Yeah.
But that was so John couldn't have access to girls.
yeah.
But she came. In fact, they used to bring her on tour and she used to hide from George.
yeah.
But he says now he was vile to her and he knows that in the 80s. But he says it's one of the most enduring relationships
Yeah.
of his whole life.
Yeah.
She sounds really sorted, actually. I liked her a lot in this.
She's the only one with the balls to stand up to
Yeah.
him. And they stood by him, and they're still really good friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. Anyway, they got signed by EMI. No, they didn't. EMI paid for them to do demos,
Yeah.
but they ultimately got signed by Virgin. The demos are White Boy, I'm Afraid of Me, I'll Tumble For You. The best tunes.
Classics. I never
best.
understood why I'll Tumble For You was never a single in England, because it would have been #1 for the whole summer.
Yeah.
It's such a good,
It's
catchy
the
tune.
best tune.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, as soon as that music went anywhere near the radio, it just got picked up because it's good music.
But that did not translate into record sales
No, not
initially.
for a while, no.
We're talking 1982, right? At the beginning of 1982, they did their first live
At
show
the very beginning, yeah.
in Crocs nightclub.
Yeah, actually it's
in
1981.
Yes, sorry, 1981 is their first.
Yeah,
gig.
yes.
Yeah. Then they pick up a manager, Tony Gordon.
Yeah.
Right, who turns out to be their manager all through their
Yeah.
fame and the downturn of their fame. And he's a great manager, actually.
Yeah, he's a real rock throughout, isn't he?
Yeah.
Really trying to help him again when he needs it.
Oh, we should also say at this time as well, in the rehearsals and stuff before their first gigs, Boy George and John Moss realise that there's something between them. And John has a girlfriend.
Yeah, but they absolutely fall in love. They properly fall in love. He leaves his girlfriend. Yeah, it's lovely for a while. It's real love for a while. But he's not willing to admit he's gay. He says he's straight and this is just an abomination, basically.
Yeah, I mean, he's still seeing women. And
That's right,
George becomes insanely jealous,
Yeah,
of course.
I mean, they're properly in love and properly a couple. And then they go out one night and he's chatting up some woman. And then John says, I'm going to drive her home. He has gone home, slept with her, and then come back. He thinks he can do that and it's okay. And it wasn't okay and it wasn't agreed on. And it's made him a jealous, crazy,
Yeah, of course.
broken man over the years.
Yeah.
That behaviour. Oh dear. And he says if he could have just had the balls to leave John that night and say, this isn't working, it would have saved him years of heartbreak. On the other hand, it fueled their music
Yeah, it got
and his
some-
creativity.
Got some good songs out of it.
all of their songs come out of that.
I mean, let's talk about that for a minute. Iconic albums, ABBA, Fleetwood Mac, no doubt all of those amazing songs are because members of the band were having these really fractious relationships, causing immense heartache. They all turn them into classic songs.
Yes, true.
More bands should have
Come a Chameleon, You Come and Go, all of that is about John Moss.
The Victims we know so well.
Victims, Do You Really Want to Hurt Me?
Yeah,
they're all about John Moss. Yeah, they had to have this nightmare.
It was essential. Yeah.
Yes. Oh my God. Of course, nobody knew what they were singing about. It's kind of hilarious that us kids were dressing up like Boy George and pinning them all on the wall and having no idea that...
He was bumming the drummer.
Yeah.
No idea.
That's poetry.
So, White Boy, absolute classic tune, released as the first single. Reviews were really good, played on the radio a lot, absolutely stiffed, got to a number 114. It's okay, it's your first single,
Yeah.
Then the second single is I'm Afraid of Me, another absolutely classic tune.
Banger.
Great Helen Terry vocals on
that.
Again, similar reception, only got to number 100. And then Virgin Records were like, oh, it's not happening. Tony Gordon says, no, please, let's just try one more song. And they'd recently recorded Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? And interesting, from reading this book, I've learned the whole thing is live. The whole track as it is on the album is just played live, no trickery. And Boy George's vocal is one take. Wow.
Yeah.
Virgin say, okay, let's release this as the next single. And Boy George was like, no, it's really slow. It starts with basically an a cappella verse at the beginning. It's kind of unheard of, really. But they released it and it just seemed to happen. And then, of course, they got that immense stroke of luck when I think they were at number 38 and somebody pulled out of Top of the Pops.
It's always that.
Yeah, and they got their chance to go on Top of the Pops.
And that's when I lost my pocket money.
There you go.
That's how historic a moment it was for me.
And then the next day, the papers were full of it. Is it a bird? Is it a bloke?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, overnight, the whole country learnt who Boy George was. Yep. That single rocketed up the charts, and a couple of weeks later, it was number 1.
Yeah, and it's hilarious. From the scene they come from, the last thing he would have expected is all these kids like me latches onto it and start dressing up like him. Mm-hmm. It must have been absurd, knowing who you are and what your real life is. It's so adult. But have all these kid fans just going mad, and it must have been absolutely absurd. And then turning up to airports and there being thousands of fans getting mobbed immediately, people outside your house immediately. In 2 weeks it happened, that turnaround, within 2 weeks.
It is amazing. Their first gig, which was a bit of a shambles, was like at the end of 1981. Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? Was number 1 at the end of 1982. 1 year, they basically went from forming the band to becoming the biggest band in the world. 1 year. And I bet because they had 2 singles, which stiffed in the meantime, I bet they thought, oh my God, this is taking ages. This is never going to happen. Whereas in retrospect, it was so quick.
Yeah, right. I mean, they were in the middle of a little British tour when they took off. So they still had to fulfil those dates. So they were playing in these tiny clubs and everyone was going mad and they still had to do these tiny gigs.
I love as well, while their records were stiffing, Hazy Fantasy were in the charts and had a pop video. John Wayne is Big Leggy, classic.
Yes.
And Boy George was just so jealous that Jeremy Healy had got there first. But about 3 months later, he was number 1.
Yes. And they fizzled out, although Jeremy Healy became a legendary DJ.
Yeah.
Did very well for himself, must have been a mint DJ.
Oh, yeah.
A mint.
Yeah, superstar DJ.
Yeah, when Boy George, after this book was written, into the 90s and 2000s, became a massive club DJ. Yeah. Apparently, he earned more money then than he ever earned in Culture Club.
Wow.
And he earned a lot in Culture Club.
Yeah, right. So once Do You Really Want to Hurt Me was number 1, then that just started a succession of
single releases,
3 hits.
Yeah.
And all classics: Time, Clock of the Heart, Church of the Poison Mind. When you look back, I think Culture Club were like massively big for about a year and a half, but each one of those singles are absolute stone cold.
They really
we haven't even got to Karma Chameleon.
We haven't even got to that. Yeah, well, their next album followed very fast. So that was 1982. Their next album came out, Colour by Numbers. That was the first album I ever bought.
Was it?
I didn't buy Kissing to Be Clever, because I didn't have any money. So I got it out of the library, sellotaped over my only blank tape, and I only recorded 4 songs off it, so that I still had room on my blank tape to record other hits off the radio. And I took it back to the library as if nothing had happened. So Colour by Numbers is the first one that I saved up for and managed to purchase.
Oh, wow.
That's how important this is to my life and yours, isn't it?
Yeah. I was lucky because my sister had all the records, well.
Karma Chameleon is just still an anthem of the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
The anthem of the 80s.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It's so catchy.
Yeah.
I never tire of it. If it ever comes on the radio now, that opening flourish. Down, 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 down. You
It's
can't
brilliant.
help but
It's
lift
happy.
your mood. It's amazing. Yeah, I love it. I bet Boy George hates it after singing it, but we all still love it.
Sick of it.
He must be sick of it. I love how much they hated making the video.
Yeah.
Because I love that video.
Some drizzly shit day. You can tell it's a really shit day, and they're just sat on a canal boat in London in the drizzle. Oh, he got a Grammy for Best Newcomer. And in America, that was live on telly. He said, you all know a good drag queen when you see one. And that almost killed them. It's like accepted if you don't say it. But if you say it, then everyone's can't like the tune because then you must be gay if you like it.
I also think that was just Boy George's way of making fun of himself. It was such a throwaway comment. Do you think of Boy George as a drag queen?
No.
No, I don't. And I don't think he ever really was. He was just this unique, individual, artistic person.
Yeah, walking work of art.
Yeah, he is himself. I think a drag queen is somebody who puts on a costume.
Oh, to look like a woman. No,
Yeah.
he never did it to look like a woman.
No, Boy George was just himself.
Yeah.
And I think he
Great
always
characters.
looked like that. Even if he went to the shop for a pint of milk, he would look like Boy George.
Yeah.
Because of that, I don't consider him a drag queen because he's just himself all the time. So I think when he said that at the Grammy acceptance, it was just a throwaway joke to himself. But, middle America, white Christian America, you only have to say something like, a good drag queen when you see one. And it's...
Yeah, they really, really turned against him. And their American tours started to dwindle.
When you think about Boy George and the image of Boy George, the shock when he first came out, that Top of the Pops, and the newspapers were just like, who is this odd individual? It's very interesting how quickly everybody took him to their hearts because he was so weird. And they're not real. Oh, right, we had Bowie and Mark Bolan, but nobody was really like Boy George before. He was so extreme.
And he might have looked like a woman, but he wore these baggy clothes and hats and dreads, and he was totally unique. And he got this woman, Sue Clowes, to design his stuff, and he created it with her, and he was completely unique.
I never thought of him as a woman at all.
Well, I thought he was, but until I immediately found out he wasn't. But then he's just Boy George.
Yeah, he's just who he is.
Yeah.
I find it weird that the whole of the country, like mainstream UK, embraced him.
Yeah.
Because he's so subversive, really.
Yeah, and the weird thing is they still do. No matter what he's done or gone through, or even handcuffing a man to a radiator for 2 days and going to prison and all the stuff, these drug problems, everything. Everyone absolutely loves him.
I think the reason why we all loved him so much is as soon as he got onto chat shows and stuff, actually you realise he was very down to earth. He was very intelligent. He was very witty. And
lovely. He's good for a laugh. He just seems like a lovely person no matter what he does. He's a lovely person who's gone through a lot. And you just support him. You can't help but support him. You can see his vulnerability. You just see the soul. He's so open. He's so unbelievably honest in this book.
Yeah.
He goes, this is my troubled soul, this is my heroin addiction, this is all my problems, this is who I am, and lays it all out. And therefore, just love him because you see all of him with all his flaws and all his amazingness and all of everything in between.
So 1983-84, Culture Club are the biggest band on the planet. Boy George is known in every corner of the world.
Yeah.
But they can't sustain that level of fame, right, for too long. They record a new album, Waking Up with the House on Fire, but of course it's that classic thing that bands complain about. For the first couple of albums, you have time in the studio to write proper songs and stuff. Then all of a sudden, you're on a worldwide tour that takes 9 months and the record company is saying, hey, we need your new album. It's just like, well, we haven't even thought about it.
Plus him and John are arguing so much they can hardly bear to be in the same room together. That doesn't help. And the bands are sort of falling apart between themselves. They get too hits out of that, the war song, War is Stupid,
Classic.
and the medal
Well,
song.
the medal song kind of stiffed a bit, didn't it?
Did a bit.
I think it's a good album.
Yeah, it's all right. But hey, at this point, Bob Geldof phones, says, quick, come to London. We're doing Do They Know It's Christmas?
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it. And the rest of the band were a bit pissed off that they didn't get
John
to be
Moss
in
got
it.
to go.
Yeah, he's in the video, isn't
Yeah.
he? In the big group shots.
I think, well, because they flew from America to London specifically to do Band Aid, and I think they said to Mikey and Roy, there's this thing happening in England, because Boy George personally got the message.
But the thing is, he's a singer, they're not, and it's about voices, surely.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. But the way he relayed it to Mikey and Roy, they said it didn't sound like it was that much of a big deal, so they decided not to go.
Yeah.
A bit like Andrew Ridgeley.
Exactly.
George Michael went.
He couldn't be bothered.
Yeah, because what could he add to it?
Well, yeah, they're not singers. But anyway, at this time as well, they were having a lot of adventures. Him and Marilyn kept going to Jamaica, hanging out in New York.
I love that actually. I do think, as much as they fall out, Marilyn is actually a very important friend, and I think a real pressure valve to that, because he would take him away to these places, and they wouldn't be pop stars; they would just be naughty boys,
naughty,
having a great time, just best friends having a great time. I think that was really important.
It is really important, but unfortunately, of course, it leads to a drug addiction problem for both of them.
Yeah, shit.
Because the first time he said he was at a party in New York and he had an E, and he really didn't do drugs, but he thought he would try it because everyone else was, and it just hit him. Oh my God, this is an amazing feeling.
Yeah.
And then from that minute on, I've always heard him, he used to say, I've got an addictive personality. As soon as he has one E, he wants all of the E's. They were at Paradise Garage in New York and met up with the DJ Larry Levan, the legend, and they're hanging out in the DJ booth, and it was all about the music. But of course, that's where the drugs are, in the DJ booth. So he discovers coke. After not long, he's taken heroin, and that's the beginning of the end of a lifelong addiction problem.
Gosh.
Because even if he's off it now, he will always crave it. I think you always do. Plus, his whole life, if you're around music and DJing and raves and all of that whole scene, there's drugs. Everybody's offering it.
You know, this whole book, like we say, it's so detailed. It's almost like his diary. You can see the drug addiction happening in real time.
Yeah.
And he's so open about it. He is one day just at a party taking a knee, and then the next day he might do 2, and then he's offered some coke.
But it's the minute he discovers the feeling, he loves the feeling. He loves drugs. Of course, once you've really gone down that heroin route, it's not so much fun straight away, because as soon as you have some, you want more. The feeling becomes more like a craving, and I don't think is as much fun
The thing that
away.
absolutely shocked me about his tales of being a heroin addict, the risks he took.
Oh my God, smuggling drugs in his shoes and
flying with heroin on yourself, because you're so desperate and you can't even get through the flight without taking some, or you're worried about, if you're going somewhere like Jamaica, maybe not being able to score for the first couple of days, so you take it with you.
Yeah.
He really relied on his fame at that point to kind of pull rank and say, I'm Boy George, let me through, kind of.
Yeah.
Although a couple of times he was searched, and he was bloody lucky they never found anything.
Until he wasn't, of course, but shocking. Anyway, I mean, this book does descend into a woeful tale. Just being really messed up on drugs, being late for interviews, being off your head in interviews, failing his band.
Yeah, and also what is shocking to me as a fan is actually him saying stuff like, oh, I was strung out on heroin for 3 days in a hotel room, and the next day I had to go and present an award at the Brit Awards. And it's kind of, well, I would have seen him doing the Brit Awards, and I would have had no idea that in the 3 days running up, he was just a complete mess on heroin.
Plus, then he'd have probably taken coke to get through the awards.
Right.
I mean, he goes to be in the A-Team. Cowboy George is the episode. I've seen that in the last couple of years. It's absolutely brilliant. He's absolutely off his head the whole time he filmed that. You watch it. Of course, you don't know. You'd have no idea what's going on in somebody's head. But it did eventually start becoming really apparent, and especially when the heroin really kicked in, the coke, and he becomes very skinny. He said he kept being mistaken for a fan.
Yeah, right, because he'd lost so much weight.
Nobody recognised him, And then he turns up to that Clapham Common anti-apartheid gig, and he's got a face pack on. He's wrapped parcel string around his head.
Yeah.
There's a picture of it in the book. And he absolutely looks like a heroin addict. And he says, I'm a drag addict, not a drug addict.
Yeah.
He's good with words.
He is.
And he said, though, that made the 10 o'clock news.
Yeah, that's how massively famous he was. One of his friends sold him out to the papers eventually, didn't they?
Yeah. Oh, that started Operation Culture, which was them trying to bring him down and to crack the whole circle of his friends and all the heroin dealers. They're ultimately trying to get to the dealers.
There's a real difference in this book to other books we've read of people who have had short lives. And that is the people around Boy George, like Richard Branson, the boss of his record company, his band, his mum and dad, they were all constantly knocking on his door, making sure he was all right. He ignored them the best he could because he was a heroin addict, but they were so persistent and they would come and get hold of him. Richard Branson would give George his house to go and stay in. The complete opposite to like the Whitney Houston story where her family and friends could see what state she was in. They still made her work. They still made her get on stage.
It's true. They saw the state of him and they cancelled the tour and said, we're just going to put the time in to make you get better and cancel the work. That is the only time we've ever heard of this, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's probably why he's still alive.
It probably is. But it's just, he's just so loved. Everyone loved him. No matter how obnoxious his behaviour is, which it really is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fights in restaurants, it's all that rock and roll nonsense, but yeah, they really, really tried to protect him. His parents are amazing. A couple of his brothers have kind of come over to his side and have taken up the drugs and gone along with him. A lot of his friends are up for the ride of it, but he's paying for everything and they're having a great life and he's flying them here and to parties there and all of that. But the rest of the people are trying to save him.
It's an extraordinary story, really. It's interesting that at the height of his fame, he was completely clean. And he didn't take the point where he should be taking loads of drugs and being a rock and roll star.
And he wasn't sleeping around either. He was in love with John.
Yeah. So it's almost like it was all building up. And then the second he started taking drugs, he really made up for lost time.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's just that thing where you have access and you have money and you have enough people who want to also hang out and do it with you.
It's weird though. Whilst we say there's access and there's drugs everywhere, it was very hard to get heroin. It was a real struggle. And anyway, there's these characters that crop up, and once that Operation Culture happened, a lot of them got arrested. Yeah. And a couple of his heroin dealers, basically a couple who were parents, actually went to prison for 4 years.
Yeah.
He says he felt responsible at the time, but now he realised they had it coming because they were heroin dealers before he met them.
Yes.
It wasn't his fault.
Yeah.
And then his friends started dying of heroin overdoses and drug overdoses.
Really
some people really close to him that he really cared about. And the first one happened in his house.
Yeah.
He wasn't actually there. Michael Radetzky, he'd had him flown over from New York to work on some music. He didn't know that he'd just come out of a clinic and got clean. Of course, as soon as he's in Boy George's house, the drugs lying about and he just took them. And it killed him because it was a shock to the system. That was the first massively shocking thing, and that's what made the news and really outed him as a drug addict, with follow-up stories and everyone trying to sell their stories. And then another really good friend of his, Mark, who'd just been out in the town with the night before, then died. He said, especially after that inquest for Michael Radetzky, that he felt like he had blood on his hands. So all of that is going to weigh him down so much that, of course, he just takes more and more drugs to numb it. So it was really escalating. Then Richard Branson steps in to try and help him with the parents. It's up and down. He's clean and he's not. He's clean and he's not. He goes out clubbing. He gets bored. There's a period where he's off heroin for so long, but he's taking everything else. He actually says, nobody believed I was clean. He wasn't clean.
It's that classic addict thing. We had it in the Matthew Perry book. It's like he's hooked on alcohol and painkillers, and then he gives that up, but he'll take a bit of cocaine because it's not alcohol and painkillers. So they think they're curing that addiction by taking cocaine, but actually no, it's still the addiction.
Yeah, and the heroin come down, he really describes it, and it's horrendous.
Oh my God,
and it's the fear, the constant fear, and the psychological feeling of despair. The doctors keep saying this is a psychological addiction now. It's not physical anymore. You need to sort your brain out. And he eventually finds Buddhism and then Hare Krishna and goes to India and has a spiritual awakening that actually starts to bring him out of this darkness. And then he suddenly writes Bow Down Mister. There's always music that comes out of it.
What's interesting about Bow Down Mister is that he'd actually got back together with Culture Club at that point to record a 5th album. They were writing songs and stuff, and he brought them Bow Down Mister, and they said, oh my God, this is the new Karma Chameleon.
Yeah.
Interesting to me that could have been a Culture Club song.
Yeah.
But instead, it all fizzled out. I think George wasn't in the right place at that time, and he went off and he got more into the club scene with Jeremy Healy, started DJing, and then he did the band Jesus Loves You, which was very spiritual.
Yeah.
I know what it was. They released the first Jesus Loves You song after the Love, and the reviews were really, really good. And George actually thought, oh, so I don't need Culture Club.
Yeah, because John Moss had always told me you're nothing without Culture Club, and he started thinking, maybe I am.
Yeah.
Basically, he started doing loads of stuff at the same time. He was trying to get over all of this, with all the deaths and everything. And they said, keep busy. A lot of stuff was happening all at the same time.
Do you know what as well? So much happens in this book. We've actually forgot to mention that he's had a whole solo career as well. Everything I Own.
Yeah.
Like a massive number one.
Yeah, it's a cover, isn't it?
Yeah.
A beautiful, beautiful cover.
When they were recording his solo album, I think it was the last thing they recorded. I think that solo album is great. In fact, Boy George's solo career, I've been on YouTube this week. There was a song he released called Living My Life. It is the perfect pop song. It got to like number 68 or something. I watched a video on YouTube this week and I could not for the life of me figure out why it was not a massive hit. And then you think, oh my God, he was a heroin addict.
Yeah.
And he was flaking out and he wasn't doing promotion and something. He couldn't do promotion. He got to the point where his manager was getting really annoyed with him because he would have him slots on Italian chat shows and performing his song here. And he was just strung out on heroin. He wouldn't go.
He's falling asleep in interviews and stuff. It's bad. Sweating through all his makeup. Oh, he was a terrible mess.
I tell you what else happened which wouldn't have helped his solo career. It was the Christmas edition of Top of the Pops. And he came back to sing Everything I Own, and he made himself a hat out of McDonald's wrap.
But they said you can't promote McDonald's on Top of the Pops.
Take the hat off.
And he wouldn't. He just stormed off. And I'm like, couldn't you have just ripped the McDonald bits off the hat?
So because of that, he didn't appear on the Christmas Top of the Pops, which is a huge audience.
Yeah,
I mean, he could have just taken his hat off.
He could have just done that.
It would have sold more records.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he's so over it at that point.
Yeah.
I think he's a case of once you have massive, all-encompassing worldwide fame, once you've had it and it's gone, I don't think it's as important that you want that level again.
Yes. Because he'd say turn up to an airport and there'd be one fan.
Yeah. I bet it was a relief.
But imagine, because he said he found he could be anonymous. He went on holiday, I can't remember, Ibiza or something. Found he could be anonymous if he didn't put any makeup on. Then he realised he didn't like it, so he started penciling in his eyebrows, and everyone would say, oh, it's Boy George, and he liked it. So it's just full of contradictions, isn't it?
It is funny that he just has to pencil his eyebrows in and he's recognised as Boy George.
But anyway, he gets really into producing dance music because he loves dance music.
Yeah, he starts the More Protein record label.
Yeah.
And he realises he actually loves music so much.
Yeah.
It's as satisfying just to produce and promote and get a new label going.
Yeah.
And that's where the Easy Posse, everything starts with an E, MC Kinky. He's bringing people together who are
and it's
really
making
talented.
him happy again. And he goes off on tour on his own with MC Kinky and realises he's happy just like that. Like it reminds him of the old early Culture Club days.
And he's going right back to basics insofar as when they record Everything Starts with an E, no record company wants it. So he prints up 500 white labels himself and he would go to clubs himself, giving it to DJs like Lisa Lashes. And so he's doing that whole thing like Beastie Boys and Madonna did, going up to the DJs and saying, play my record. After he's been massively worldwide famous, he's doing it right from the bottom again.
Yeah.
Because he loves the music. It's what motivates him. Yeah.
So ultimately, right at the end of this book, he walks out of Culture Club, leaves them forever. And that's where we find this book has ended. But we know that it carries on. Because from 95, I must have seen him Culture Club in concert for the first time in about 97, 98.
So their first proper comeback.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the first time I saw them. I've seen them since a couple of times.
And like you say, this is his first autobiography. Actually, he has two more now. And I'm desperate to read both of them.
I am too.
And also, I don't think we've really talked about his solo career too much. That's gone on for decades now because he did The Crying Game, which is a classic. No Clause 28, same thing in reverse. He's
Generations of Love.
Constantly made music, even though it hasn't been number one stuff. He has a really great body of work because he's a fantastic songwriter.
Yeah.
And a really lovely soul voice.
Ah, it's just gorgeous. Boy Gorgeous, we used to call him. We did.
Gorgeous George. So, I know we say this often, but this really is a book that people need to read because we talked about 5% of it in this hour. Oh my
God. If you're at all interested in this era, it's a Bible to the era.
It's almost not just about Boy George, it's about the whole scene.
It is. It's the 80s.
And there's so many stories. I mean, there's
Early
everyone
80s.
From Madonna to...
There's loads of Madonna gossip.
Yeah.
Andy Warhol, Quentin Crisp.
Yeah, they're all in it. I become so engrossed in this book when I was reading it.
Me too.
Yeah, I loved it. And now I want to spend the time reading the next two, but we can't because we have to go on and read another one.
Yeah.
Our reading list is very
exciting.
Impressive and exciting.
It really is.
So we'll have to do another Boy George podcast next year.
Yeah.
So we can read
the next
all about
two.
It. Yeah.
Brilliant. So keep living, Boy George. Keep being amazing. We all love you.
Yeah, we do.
Keep brightening up our lives.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Thrift Shop Biography. We love making this podcast and we're absolutely thrilled that so many of you are already listening. We're new to this and you could really help us out by leaving us a review somewhere, wherever you listen to this podcast. And if you could share us, tell your friends about us or drop some links on social media. We have a Facebook page called Thrift Shop Biography, so make sure you come over there to hear about the episodes first and what else we're up to. Okay, see you next week. And if you're new here, there are loads more episodes now to go and listen in the back catalogue, so make sure you go and enjoy them. Okay, thank you very much.